have a critically important business leadership conversation at a critical time. Welcome back to the advisory deck. We're doing a special edition today, which is unpacking a panel discussion that James and I were involved with a few nights ago with a panel of South Australian business leaders thriving in business in South Australia in 2021 and beyond. How are you, James?
I'm good, Troy, thank you.
Good to hear. A terrific conversation, and we were really fortunate to have four stellar leaders. So we had Martin Palmer from the Palmer Hospitality Group, Nikki Govan from Business SA and Star of Greece, Steven Trigg, who's the Managing Director of Randall Wine Group, yes, and Bruce Djite, who's the Director of Football at Adelaide United Football Soccer Club. And this conversation was all about what did we learn from COVID and the difficult period of 2020, and what can we do in our businesses, no matter which sector we're in, to try and position ourselves to thrive in 2020, 2021 and beyond, right?
Yeah, spot on.
So what we thought we would do, we took a long form video of the entire panel conversation, but we're just going to pull a couple of key concentrate pieces out for you today in this discussion. The first thing that really came to the surface was, what did you learn from COVID? Every one of these businesses was affected. When the panel talked about what COVID taught them, James, what stood out for you?
Yeah, not surprisingly, I guess, because it stood out for, I think, everyone in the room. We had a conversation afterwards with a lot of people. Looking back now, it's easy to go, wow, we didn't see that coming. At the time, we just didn't see it coming.
No.
And I think whether you're a business leader that's in a small team or a business leader like Marty, I think Marty Palmer's got 500 people working across his hospitality group. There's I think close to 100 in the Randall Wine Group of employees before you get to vintage. Big companies, small companies didn't have strategic plans, didn't have risk management plans that said what's going to happen to our business if the world shuts down, our industry shuts down, what are the what if scenarios. We didn't do it. I think we've spoken about often, business continuity. You speak about what happens if there's a fire, what happens if you lose power, what happens if you lose a key person, what happens if there's a break in a supply chain, all these scenarios that are quite possible, but they're interrupting more than shutting down. And I think that might be one of the changes that comes out of this, is the realisation that in a more global world, where even in Adelaide, in a small company sense, we are part of a global world, and that necessity to make sure that you have some sort of thinking about not what would you do if something happens, but what's your decision-making process, what's your go-to plan. I think that's going to be the key, because they all these four leaders spoke about that, of going, we didn't have it, and so we had to scramble. And that's this is a 1 in a 100-year event, right? So we kind of all scrambled, but I think that was a key take out of, you don't know what's going to come, but you can be sure something big's going to come again. How do you react to that as your executive team to make decisions?
Yes.
You don't know what the outcomes are going to be, but what's that decision-making framework? So that was one of the key things that popped out for me.
And to kind of build on that, something that Marty sort of focused on a little bit was question everything. We were forced to question everything, every decision we're going to make, every sort of, why are we doing this? And in a period where it seems fairly calm on the surface, it's really easy to be complacent, stop questioning everything, because everything's smooth sailing. But when your world's tipped upside down and your doors are closed for a period, and again, regardless of what sector you're in, the process of going through and asking critical, hard questions of everything, will this form part of our future? Why are we going about it? Is there a more efficient way to do it? And is there an opportunity to improve and build efficiencies or get closer to our customers via this kind of topsy-turvy moment we're living through? That really stood out for me.
It's a reminder, it's so important not to be only working as executives, leaders, owners, whatever it might be, not to only work in the business. And it's so hard when you're busy, especially through a pandemic, and you're trying to just survive, let alone thrive. You've got to step out of the business and think about why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Why are we doing it this way? Yes, I know it works, but is it the best way? And that's the hardest thing. I think we've spoken before in these sessions about our strategic planning sessions dead? Are those 5-year plans dead? And I think my response at the time was, well, they are. This was halfway through the pandemic. Yes, I mean, you can't plan 5 years ahead anymore. It just changes too quickly. It's only 12 years since the iPhone came out. Right, you're doing a 5-year plan with technology changing now so quickly, you just can't do it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't step out of the business and do those planning sessions and go, why are we doing that?
Yes.
What if this happens?
Yeah.
It gets hard, which is why I think it helps to bring others in to challenge that thought process.
Yeah.
It gets hard to figure out where do you focus on, what should you be thinking about.
Yeah.
But if you don't step out of the business on a regular basis and do that, then over time your business will become lazy, complacent, inefficient, because people just get in the habit of doing what works for them, because businesses are all about people, and they get slow, and that doesn't make you competitive.
And it might be fine when the water's smooth, but the moment things whip up into a storm, you're brittle and you're going to break, and you're in trouble. Let's take a look at what some of the panelists actually had to say.
Where I landed, first of all, in those early days was, it made me realise how important your relationships are. You know, it was a matter of, it was a great learning curve, because I think we just questioned everything. I think we questioned everything we did. We had to look at the business from top to bottom, you know, why we do that, how we do that, when we do that. Should we be doing that instead?
I've been really impressed with the industry in terms of its ability to plan, and the expertise that prevails throughout is really impressive. It's quite a collaborative note to the industry as well. But having been involved in a lot of strategic planning over the years, it's just interesting that whilst there's good plans in place, I don't think anybody ever really thought about what if China shut off completely? What if it actually just shut? When I say that, it might have been a thought process in a strategic planning session, but actually fleshing that out as part of the planning process of what would we do? But what ifs? Before you call it what ifs, it's immediately before you play. What if this happens? What if that happens?
So many businesses at the moment are still sitting at only 50%. So you've got to be innovative and you have to change things. And I don't think, you know, we certainly move very, very swiftly, like many other restaurants, to go to double sittings. I'd like to think that we'll never ever change that. Anybody in hospitality will probably say that, but that'll be in a way the consumers might sort of buck that. We also then move to do things like on a weekend, so what's a minimum of 2 courses. Now, I can tell you I've fielded conversations with people that just say, I don't want to pay for 2 courses. And I was talking to somebody earlier about my response, which is rather more polite than it used to be. I think some of these profile positions I'm now having is sort of keeping me a little bit more politically correct. But you have to change and innovate. So we've made these decisions, and if I talk just about our business, over summer, which is our busiest time, that's when we're there to make money, our restaurant made the same, turned over the same in the restaurant as the same period last year. I was pumped about that, absolutely pumped. The kiosk, which is the more casual dining, because people were travelling more regionally, that was up. And so we then had to work out ways to sort of innovate and cope with those. So
community is massive for us. So, you know, we have, or football has, the highest number of participants of any sport in Australia. But there seems to be a disconnect between, you know, the under 7s and under 10s and under 11 kids that love to run around on the weekend and bumps on seats in the stadium on the weekend as well. So there's a number of factors to that. Part of it is we play the professional game in summer, all the juniors play through winter, so you've got a bit of a disconnect there. But engaging with our community is huge. The multicultural and you know, diverse backgrounds, whatever you want to call it, new arrivals is a massive target market for us. Not in the sense that let's go here to this school and hope that these guys all become members. That's not the motive. But it's more about let's go there and make sure that all these kids start to build an affinity with the club. Because over time, they will become more and more invested, and then maybe, you know, in 3, 4, 5, 10 years, they may become a member. I think it's a long road.
The second thing that I think bubbled out of the conversation, James, was around strategy and decision making. You know, in this moment now, with 12 months of, you know, a discombobulated world in our rearview mirror, but knowing we're not getting out of that anytime soon, how are we rethinking our decision making and strategic planning processes, and what came to the surface for you?
I think with that again, it's about not accepting that what you're doing is going to be able to continue on. It's realising that you need to have decision making frameworks, because that helps you guide the process, right? I remember putting together effectively a weighting decision making system a few years ago for a company that went through a number of different areas of financial, of brand, of operational, and this is a company that was driving acquisitions. So they were looking to sort of expand into new areas, and it was clear that there was a lot of subjective conversations going on around the boardroom table about what they should go and do and why company A is better than company B. But there wasn't a framework that said, well, let's weight it up and start looking at trying to score an opportunity, so we can come back to being objective rather than subjective, and have a reference that is there on day 1, day 180 and day 360. So we did a weighted system for them, and that allowed them to move away from being a bit more emotional and having a framework that was much more focused. And I think in times of crisis, you want to have that clarity of thought about what's important. Is this opportunity, how closely is this opportunity or this issue aligned with our core business? Is it a great opportunity because it's rated 90 out of 100 on a score that everyone's agreed before something's gone wrong? Or is it weighted 50, which means, well, it looks interesting, someone's got it as their champion project, but in the scheme of the opportunities, it's not really that important. So I think what's come out of it from the conversations, and especially what Marty and Steven were saying, is, to me, it's the importance of having decision-making processes. Marty spoke at one point during the night about, you know, he would have walked into a place like the Lion that they'd just bought in their portfolio. You walk in and he can see the vision. He's been in the industry a long time. He understands this really intimately. He can see the vision and go, we could make this happen. It's a good location. It's a great asset, except all those things that an experienced person could look at a business and go, that looks like a good fit. You don't make a decision on that. You go, let's go and make an opportunity assessment from that.
That's the catalyst for doing the rigorous sort of heavy lifting on does this make sense?
And you go, and then, but you know, clearly they've got a process then. And they put it through the process, whatever their process is, and go, well, it's worth considering and putting time into. Let's put it through our process. And I'm sure their process will be pretty similar to what we built for another company, where at the end of it you go, no, that stacks up. You know, you're still rolling the dice on these things, right? Like, there's no guarantees in anything, but at least you go in there going, we've done our what if scenarios that Steven spoke about as well. We've looked at the financials, we understand the benefits, we probably understand the costs, the risks, how well does it fit in with everything else we're doing. We've been through a process. It isn't just sitting around the table going, hey, this sounds like a good idea. I think too many leaders that we speak to don't have that rigour when it comes to their decision making. They have a business plan, but that business plan isn't necessarily founded in or grounded in something that says we've been through a process, we've been through and we've assessed each different area to make sure this is a good fit for us, whether it's a new product or buying a business that's 140 years old. That process, that decision-making framework, to me, is so critical.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great insight, and I think next to that was this thinking that whatever we do in our strategic decision-making, whatever kind of constraints we've had thrown at us, we should always be thinking about getting closer to our customers. And again, it was Marty that sort of honed in on this idea that, okay, we've had some challenges and some constraints, but we also have some fascinating tools and opportunities to rethink how we go about this. You know, the idea that should we go back to the old way of operating? Well, why would we do that? Because, you know, that's not progress, that's regression. But in progress and in kind of having to work in a new sort of framework and paradigm, there are opportunities for us to get closer. If we're opening up, you know, different spaces in our hotel to meet the sort of social distancing requirements, well, there's ways to create new experiences for our customers. If we're leveraging digital channels and platforms because that's our primary communication mechanism, because they physically can't come to us for a period of time, well, let's leverage that. And so I think, and Bruce touched on this, as did Nikki, you know, the idea of how do we employ the technology that we have, that if this had happened 20 years ago, this would have been unbelievably challenging. We have ways to get close to our customer, and that should always be at the foremost of your strategic thinking, right?
Bruce made a really good point about their long-term engagement with the community, and what they do is, you know, Adelaide United, they go out to schools, and it's not about getting the kid who they talk to in the schoolyard to come to a game tomorrow. It's about thinking 5, 10, 15 years time of, right, how do you engage, how do you make that child in the schoolyard over time get to know the club better, get to know the players better, and then take the parents and say to the parents, I want to go to that game, which leads to buying merchandise. It's a long-term play for them. And I think that's a really good example for businesses, that you don't need to only focus on getting the sale tomorrow.
No.
Right? You need to think about the long term, building relationships with your existing and potential clients. So there's a trust there, there's a value, there's a relationship beyond a transaction. And I think if you can do that, whether you're the IGA, whether we spoke with Peter Ringgit, Beck Hardy, before Christmas about their engagement with customers, right? And how quick and responsive they are to their customers. I think you were saying, Richard, there at 2 o'clock in the morning talking about responding to customers
Christmas
online.
morning as well, we did,
Yeah, so I think this view that to get through challenging times, and those challenging times will come again in whatever form they come in, that relationship with your customers, existing and prospective, using digital channels now more than ever to do that, so important.
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, let's have a listen to what some of our panel had to say about strategy and decision making right now.
Our recent purchases have really come out of people who weren't under financial duress but decided to exit the industry because COVID actually changed their whole way of thinking. They suddenly went, you know what, I actually enjoyed for 10 or 12 weeks not running this business anymore. And actually, you know what, maybe I've got better and more interesting things to do. And so that actually has probably been the biggest thing for us, is that we want to be in the industry and want to grow, and we're there helping people exit the industry that actually want to exit the industry. I guess there's an element of strategy and intuition. I suppose we look at properties like this and we think, we understand that, we think we can do well there. I guess that's the intuition element of it. But then, you know, there of course there is analysis. There's I mean, what are we buying? We're buying a property. There's what is the underlying value of the asset? Are we buying goodwill? What is that really worth? What do we think we can do with it? What can we actually, you know, how much do we need to spend capital on it? And then, obviously, you run the numbers, and does it get over the hurdle or doesn't it? So there's both. The intuition probably brings us to the table, and then from there the analysis takes over.
You know, leave aside corporate detail. I just need a little bit of a move. I'm loath to use the word pivot because I can't just dislike that through the whole program. But it needed to shift. It needed to move, and it has done so very successfully into the small to medium enterprise, looking after, taking the same pain away, giving time back to small to medium businesses in terms of accounts payable, receivable, bills. A little bit of the market dictated that, but a fair bit of that came from the agility of the business to be able to go that far. So it's the same thing of what if, it's the same thing of being innovative, it's the same thing of just being agile with where you might take the business, which, you know, is easier said than done. I get it. It is easier said than done. If you're in steel manufacturing, or you're really very linear with what you do, it can be tricky. But wherever possible, and the wine industry is a classic case of it, why wouldn't we be more ambitious? Why wouldn't we be able to go and do something with a stack of 100-year-old barrels? Why wouldn't we be able to do some other things? And being agile with that is being prepared.
So you can't sit back, you've got to be disruptive. You have to just look back there. You cannot just sit back and say, well, the government's closed the borders, therefore I'm affected, my business is stuffed. If you don't give me a handout, what's going to happen? So I'll give you the big tip. In March JobKeeper will end the way it is. There will be targeted stimulus for industries that are still effective, and the job seeker bonus is likely to end.
Our digital strategy was really key come COVID because there was so many restrictions. Players couldn't go to schools, players couldn't go anywhere. You had to operate in this bubble, so you had a complete disconnect with the broader community. A lot of our fans from a younger demographic, so they're in tune with your Instagrams, they're in tune with your Facebook, your social medias. So a lot of the players did get online and start to interact with the fans. And even people who aren't fans, just to have that exposure, I think is really important.
James, the third kind of category of thoughts that I know came from the conversation is what should business leaders be thinking about and planning for tomorrow? What insights did the panel glean and have for that, irrespective of what industry sector you're in? What came to the surface for you?
Yeah. And the number one takeout for me, and we spoke just before about digital, how important digital is, I think there are a number of tools in a strategic planning session, and your digital strategy might be one, your PR strategy might be one. All those things are really, really important. The most important thing that came out from me in the themes of almost every response that the four panelists gave was people. I think the heart of every business is people, and there's that saying, I can't recall the person who said it, put your customers first. It might be Richard Branson. Put your staff first, right? It's your staff that builds the business. And that's, if they're happy, if they're doing the job well, your customers will appreciate that. And I think that was the key. Marty said at the beginning of the night how important his relationships were with suppliers, with the banks, with staff, family. Those things were so critical because when you hit a crisis, they're the groups that are going to get you through. We did some work with a food manufacturing business last year, and they had a major production run. And there was an issue with one of the products, and it was the relationships with their suppliers that got them through that process, because the suppliers go, we've dealt with you for a long time, we're going to ride this thing through with you. And that was a really powerful thing for that business to know that their suppliers are going to work with them. So at the heart of every business strategy, to me, I would say, is build your people strategy. We spoke with John Dare recently about emotional intelligence. I think part of that people strategy should be, how do we make sure our team has the right tools to survive whatever change, big or small? We don't know what it's going to be. 12 months ago, we were sitting here having conversations. It wasn't about a global pandemic. Right? No one knew what was coming. Those companies that have given their people the tools to adapt and survive and thrive, I think will be the ones that really generally start to win over the next 1, 2, 3 years, because people are at the heart of what your business is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to kind of, to flow from that, two words that Stephen used in his kind of commentary were the double-edged sword of agility and resilience. And John and the Emotus teams work on resilience. This won't be the last, major disruption that your business or team ever kind of go through, and it's going to go on for a while. How are you arming your team with the tools? How are you nurturing the culture in your business of resilience, of the idea that it will be hard, it will be challenging, but we can survive this and we can thrive through this. And the other piece that really stood out for me was flexibility and agility, and being able to move quickly, being able to think innovatively, being able to change direction, and where once we might have held this excuse, we're too big, well, our systems and processes are pretty rigid and fixed in place and don't muck with things. Well, guess what? When the world mucks with it, it's fascinating how quickly we find a way, or the successful businesses that get out of these challenging periods find a way to be nimble. And so I think, again, and we heard it from all four of the panelists, and Nikki kind of touched on this right across the business SA and wider business ecosystem in South Australia, those in any sector who were able to move quickly, think about how do we keep cash flow going, how do we get closer to our customers, how do we adjust, how do we reposition ourselves for a new normal, a different world. Those are the ones who are sitting here now in February 2021 looking more optimistically at where we're going.
And all of those things you just spoke about, all quite correct, is about people. It's about people. Your processes don't change themselves. Your systems don't change themselves. Marketing doesn't just happen. You don't decide to change your business model about revenue. It doesn't change by itself, right? It's about people.
Yes.
Invest in the people, hire good people, reward them appropriately,
Yeah.
give them the tools, make sure they're clear on the vision and understand where they fit in the vision, empower them to do the right thing.
And nurture
take care
those
of them.
relationships too, right?
It's critical. It's people. It's the heart of every good business.
The new norm, getting back to normal. Well, in our industry, I don't think it will it'll never be what it was before, and I think actually that's progress. I think that's actually a good thing. So that getting the hub of the question is that would be the big takeout. If I go back a step, I mean, we went from being shut down to sitting down only to consume alcohol to when are we going to be able to get back to the pub, then when are we going to be able to stand up to drink, and now we're going through when are we going to be able to dance, so we're still moving through that, but I guess we've learned a lot along the way. I mean, booking, pubs were very impulsive things, in the sense of a bunch of guys might go, okay, let's go down to the pub and have a few pints on Saturday afternoon. And that was it through their thought process. Nowadays, those guys will ring the pub and say, hey, we want to come down, can we reserve a spot? So now we don't just reserve at our restaurants, we reserve everything. And that's a great thing, because that's allowed us to connect. We're creating a much stronger connection with our customer base than we ever have been able to before. So
I'm a massive believer in diversity. I dislike quotas immensely, and that doesn't please a lot of women because I want people to think about the benefit of diversity. I'm not just talking about gender, I'm talking about ethnicity, I'm talking about age. Because I will hire young and old, I'll hire mums because of the benefit that they bring to our business. And I know that when they come to work and they're there for that period of time and their child's in school, they're absolutely focused. So I think that diversity and thinking about that in your workplace and at a board level is incredibly important, and there are huge benefits for it. So then when you think about that, hiring a millennial is very different to hiring a 55-year-old person, and understanding what you want and who's going to be the best person to deliver that.
In the last few years, my last few years in the AFL, there was so much time and effort put into giving players the tools to be resilient. Yeah. So much time and effort. How to handle the knockbacks, how to handle it physically, emotionally. So much in terms of support mechanisms. Someone described it as overs in terms of that support. But how do we give, what tools do we give athletes individually to be able to handle adversity? The overlay with the organisational set, for me, with us, at 130 odd staff, is how can I give them the tools, both individually and for us as a group, to be resilient for the next time one of these kicks in the guts come along?
The digitisation of everything. I think you can do things leaner and meaner. That's a benefit to your organisation, and it future-proofs any future kick in the guts or whatever you want to call it, like SWAT events. And I think on your traditional leadership sort of side, I think it's confronting, having tough conversations early, but being empathetic. And that comes back to what Nikki said around diversity. But it's about embracing those tough conversations. I think as a leader, it's your responsibility to have those, but do it in an empathetic way.
So, James, that was an exceptional conversation. A huge thanks to Chatham Capital Exchange, to Onda Lifestyle Concierge, and to Stellan Capital as well for putting on what was a really important discussion. The long form of the video we're also making available via the YouTube channel as well. So if you want to see the panelists' conversations in full, and it's well worth a look. 45
minutes and amazing insights from really experienced people.
The depth of experience is pretty staggering, and the MC is a pretty good looking rooster too. So, James, thank you for your insights as always.
Good fun.
Thanks for joining us on the advisory deck, and we will see you again very soon.
As it was in Britain, work together, but back yourself to be better than everybody else is to do. Neil Craig had a great expression of it. They can copy us all they like, we'll just do it better. In terms of the way we play, what we do, and so forth. And it's always stuck with me. Work together, be collaborative with others for the mutual benefit of the rising tide. But just quietly, we'll do it better than anybody else.